Thank you, Summer Choir and Summer Bells, and all of you. Just bathing ourselves in those words of assurance and trust, those words of ever-presence, accompaniment, love. Is it okay if I move this? Can I move this? Thank you. Just let those words and sounds and vibrations wash over you. So Psalm 16 is a beautiful testimony to God's presence and God's love. And it's this proclamation of a sense of security and safety. And this is a very fraught concept. Safety, security, protection. And it's so fraught that it's actually something we sort of avoid talking about. And today I want to talk about it. I want us to talk about it together. Luke will have the mics, and this is a time, just imagine that Iguana is here and you can ask any question, okay? You can ask any question at any time. Anytime something is coming up for you, you have curiosity or something's not landing for you, or you just don't understand something, it's okay for you to ask a question. Okay, so I want you to download that. It's okay to ask a question. So, before my life at Grace Covenant, which has now been many years ago, I was doing a lot of writing and a lot of facilitating and working in all kinds of different institutions and and governing bodies and denominations. I was teaching in divinity schools, I was leading retreats, I was doing all kinds of stuff. And a lot of what I was doing work around were things that were hard to talk about. Trauma, especially sexual trauma, race, interfaith dialogue, sexuality. That was during the kind of heat of the battle in the Presbyterian Church USA around sexuality and ordination and marriage equality. So back then, when I first wrote my dissertation that then became my first book, trauma theory was just this kind of new emerging body of knowledge. And a lot of it was based on work with veterans or Holocaust survivors, people who had been through really extreme forms of trauma. And the more this body of knowledge emerged, the more it has shifted in the way we understand it. So back when I wrote Let the Bones Dance, which as the publishing world has it, was many years before it actually was published. So in the early 2000s when I was writing it, the definition of trauma was really a life interruption, something outside the normal experience of life that sort of overloads your system. Now the definition of trauma really is just too much, too fast, and sometimes for too long. It's not necessarily something we now understand as outside the norm or a life interruption because of its pervasiveness. And this varies according to one's identity and social location. Some bodies are marked in our culture, and every day, those bodies are walking through trauma after trauma of different orders of magnitude. Now you might be curious, or maybe not. Maybe you just want to go get the ice cream. It's okay, whatever you're feeling. Curious about why I would be interested in this as a white woman. And really what the process of writing my dissertation and first book was for me was a healing. It was how I finally came out into the public and said I was raped and I was stalked for years, and I learned that no one was going to protect me, and I kept it a secret for so long. And even though it was something people could see happening right in front of their faces, they could see him push me down at school. He pulled a knife on me at track practice. He would chase me in the car. He climbed onto my roof to try to get in my house. I mean, he wasn't subtle about it. Even though it was so out there, nobody really acknowledged it. So the violence that happened to me was trauma. But I think the deeper trauma was that people just watched it happen and didn't really act. That is a deeper trauma that I carry around. I've had to do a lot of work in my life. But I think part of and writing that book was huge, and it was tough. And as soon as it was published, I had these pangs of regret. Why did I do that? Why did I expose myself? Can I really trust the world with this vulnerability? But that's kind of been something God's just continued to call me into. And this idea of a trustworthy community, a trustworthy place where we can acknowledge harm and acknowledge things that are going on, I didn't even know that I would ever have that. You know, I went into ministry for other reasons, probably DNA, since I'm the fourth generation in my family, and as much as I resisted it, here I am doing it. I didn't have in my conscious mind, I'm looking for a way to have a trustworthy community. I didn't have that in my mind. In fact, churches have not been trustworthy communities for me. They have really not. They've been tough places. But, you know, did y'all know church people can be mean sometimes? Did you know that? And to their pastors, did you know that? Yeah, that happens. I know, help us, Jesus. So our practices together around truth-telling, around accountability, around trying some things out around repair and things like that. None of us know what we're doing. We weren't taught how to do any of this stuff. We're collaborating together to try some new things. If I had to name the common denominator around this room, look around, it would be church trauma. Now, not everybody has it the same way, but a lot of us are putting our toe back in with a little bit of wariness. Am I sure I really want to go to church again? Because a lot of things have happened at church, right? A shaming about your body, judgment. Sometimes these things aren't even said out loud. My church never said stuff about sexuality or virginity or anything like that, but buddy, I had it all in me that I was done for, that I was going straight to hell because of what had happened to me. And that's not even something my pastors talked about. It's in the atmosphere. Same as white supremacy, same as misogyny. So part of what we're doing at Grace Covenant is we are practicing so that our bodies can learn some new things. Our bodies can gather in some new visceral data around trust, around repair, around shared vulnerability, around liberation, around healing. And we can't do that without our bodies. We can't do it without our bodies, which is why, as much as it has annoyed people since I walked in this door, sometimes I ask you to get up and do stuff with your bodies. Because Presbyterians are notoriously just brains on a stick, and we don't really move that much. And my ancestors, I'm sure, are rolling in their graves because I resist. I refuse. Yes. So, trauma, this is not a part we talk about as much. We foreground these characteristics of white supremacy culture because this is our work. We are located in a denomination that was formed and fed by white supremacy. We're in a church with mostly white-bodied people in it. We are in a community with mostly white-bodied people in it. And we are in a community that has struggled with racial equity mightily. No matter how progressive or liberal you think this town is, we've got the worst achievement gap in the state in our schools, and we've got the 5th worst in the country. This is a place where people have created systems that have pitted black people against each other for funding, for places to live, for community even. Yeah. And so if we're going to do this work, you can't do it without talking about white supremacy. You have to talk about white supremacy. You can't not talk about it. Because it is the presenting disease. Now, trauma is knit all through that. It's knit and just, it's all through that because white supremacy is trauma. It's trauma. And guess what gave birth to white supremacy? Trauma, yes. White Northern Europeans came to this country with their trauma. Everything that enslavers did to enslave people, they learned at the hands of their family, their community, sometimes even their clergy, their governors, their mayors. All of the different forms of punishment and public shaming and submission. Where do you think they learned that? White supremacy is a fear-based plan to control people so that wealth can be accumulated because of a deep, deep-seated inferiority complex that came from trauma. It comes from trauma. And so you see what we're trying to do here is literally like, it's artful, right? Because it's hard stuff. But there's such a tenderness. There's such a tenderness, especially for people in white bodies. Like, we have to deal with this ick. And it doesn't mean you're icky, but it means you've been socialized to not see this at the expense of people in black and brown bodies and non-conforming bodies. Nobody is safe in a culture defined by white supremacy, but some people are allowed to have the illusion that they are. Other people are not. So when my safety and my whole concept of safety was exploded, I was ushered into an awareness and a knowledge at such a young age that I didn't know what to do with. And so what I did was I just shut it down. I didn't tell anybody because I lived in total fear of people finding out I wasn't perfect or I wasn't okay. So I guess I just want you to get a little bit of a taste of, this is hard work for me too, just like it is for you. We're doing this together. And we're not doing it just because, each of us are on our own little journey. We're doing it because liberation can only happen as a collective. Just checking in. Any questions coming up? Any curiosities? It's okay. Anything like any turbulence, like it's not landing, it's just not making sense, it's okay. Okay, Kelly. And then we'll come back to you, Kelly.
Where were your parents in this trauma you experienced?
Yeah. My parents were right there in my home, and I think there are reasons why it was hard for them to really accept what was going on. You all have heard that my mom and dad lost their first child when she was 14 months old. She died of leukemia. And they only knew she was sick 2 weeks before she died. My mom was 21 years old. So my parents were very young, and their relationship was kind of forged in this horrific loss, like the worst kind of loss you can ever imagine. And I think that my she kept having all these babies, she had 4 more girls, and she loved us fiercely. But it was really, really difficult for her to see our pain or deal with her own pain. And I think it was hard for her to see what was going on. A few times they were confronted with it in ways they couldn't deny. And my shutdown made it hard for them to talk to me. So I think it was kind of like a trauma storm, is what I call it. And we had no words for it. Nobody talked about stalking, date rape, stuff. Those weren't even words. Those weren't even ideas when I was growing up. So I was 15 in 1984 in a small town in Kentucky. So the way I see it now is we all kind of did the best we could. But it really, a tenacious kind of, I can't trust anybody, took hold in those days.
So I started with, can we ask the iguana?
Oh yeah, you want me to go get iguana?
So for me, this whole idea that everything we're talking about is white supremacy is a shift in paradigm for me.
Yes.
I moved here from the West Coast, and it was never talked about in that way. I mean,
well, it's not here either.
Well, we addressed discrimination and there were other words for
Yes.
the concept, but not that. And so it's really fascinating to me to hear it described this way.
Yeah, thank you. And I would say that what you just described is very common around the country, that we are able to talk about things like civil rights or discrimination or microaggressions, but we really have not been that great at talking about the culture that gave rise to those things. Because white supremacy was born in this country in the 16th and 17th centuries. That's the first time the category of white showed up in law. And it was after a rebellion of the working class. And it was because the wealthy landowners knew that their ace in the hole was going to be, we got to divide the working class. We still live in that today. That the working class is divided. And that's politically has been used to huge impact, right? The struggle to bring people together around what living in this economy is doing to working class people without this kind of racialization that divides, especially poor white people from people of color who are low resource. We live with that. And so naming discrimination is one way, right? And then we can blame the nasty racists over there. But white supremacy is a culture that has socialized all of us. And it has socialized us in white bodies not to see it. We might be able to see that icky thing where somebody uses a racial slur, but we don't know that we have it in our bodies. And that these ideas and concepts that we've grown up around propriety and virtue and manners and binary thinking and there's one right way and all the things, it's our culture. And so my I guess now it's my purpose in life is for this to be a paradigm shift that we make on a large scale. And there are many of us out there in the world, right, Tammy? Working on these issues. That's part of why we're seeing this white lash right now, because this push to teach and to reframe and to help people see the truth of white supremacy, it was working. It was working. Things were changing. And so this is a shut it down. It's what always happens in this country when black people get some power. There's a white lash. And it's what's happening. So thank you for bringing those fresh eyes.
From the YouTube chat, we have Matt Weedle asking, aside from personal work and counseling to deal with internal trauma, what are some good approaches to dealing with collective societal trauma?
Thank you, Matt. That's a great question. And so, again, some of this you might not be aware of, but everything we do at Grace Covenant is trauma informed. So part of how you learn in your body that a community can be trusted is your nervous system learns what it's like to be in a space. Does anybody remember the pews? Okay, we took those out in May 2023. And we started to look at each other and see each other. We started to move things around and have to learn how to be flexible or ask for support if we needed it. Even when we still had the pews, I might go out and ask people what they think about things. Trauma-informed means people feel like they can be heard and seen. They can make mistakes and get support when they do. They can be curious about things. They can try things on for size. And these conversations around accountability, these practices that we do, these are all trauma-informed. And how does it feel to be a person that has not felt safe in other church spaces, to be in a church space where, you know what? You can ask a question. You can get up and walk out if you need to. You can play the drums. You can move around. You can take a nap. I'm fine if you take a nap. You can be yourself. You can be in your own body. Got one over here. So I guess, Matt, one thing I wanted to say back to Matt was just what we're doing here is we're trying to practice different ways for our nervous systems to learn how to trust a moment, a space, a relationship, a conversation, a transformation. And we try to address the nervous system in a lot of ways here. Every time we pick a picture out, every time we think about what activities we're going to do during truth-telling, those things are ways to practice. There's no shortcut. you have to practice. Okay, who was it over here? Yes, Susan.
Hi.
Hi.
So I want to recognize lots of us have been through trauma. Some of us definitely through childhood trauma, sexual trauma. I would like to ask you to speak to the fact that it's a lifelong journey to trust.
Yes.
Because trauma happens to somebody who's been through trauma, often through life, and re-triggers that. And I would just ask you to speak to that, please.
Thank you. Yes. So one of the things that I do believe is that we don't ever get rid of our trauma, but we learn to live with it in different ways. Every time we get triggered or it comes back up, we are circling back through that with new tools and new resources. And sometimes we're able to navigate it with a different, kind of integrated adult self. And sometimes one of those parts might really get out in front and be in charge. And just that deep compassion we just keep coming back to. And one of the things I feel like we're trying to do together is build just a softer place to land when some of our younger parts have taken charge. Because it's a very tender process. And I believe that my life, I'll never know what my life could have been. So I get these washes of grief. But I also love some things about the way my life is that I don't think would have been. I probably could have found some great things without all this terrible stuff. But the acceptance and the capacity to grieve, and then to really lean into support. When we get hurt as little ones, it's really hard to trust support. So thank you for letting us be your community. We love you. Yeah. Does that kind of touch on what you were curious about? Yes. Yes. Yeah, can you say that again in the mic? That was really wise.
It's trying to figure out how to let go of the place you had to go to survive as a child.
Yeah.
When you feel that same sense of loss of security as an adult.
Yes, thank you, Susan. And so again, that kind of internal practice of compassion. Like it's okay that you're up and aware and like thinking you need to take charge, and just really being soft with that part and saying, hey, I might try something else right now. Thank you. Did somebody else have? Yes. Hi.
Hi, I'm like super new. This is my first
Yay,
day.
welcome.
Thank you. My name's Isabella.
Hi, Isabella.
Thanks. And I just sort of had a question. Something I've been struggling with recently is how to pray when the conception of God that certainly I have is, I grew up Baptist, is like very white, straight, male God.
Yeah.
And that can be pretty scary. And I think sometimes I find when I go to pray, I don't trust who I'm praying to, and I go in with so much fear and apprehension. And I think that comes from, this idea of church trauma and life trauma. It doesn't even, when you're coming to a God that is portrayed in that certain way, it can be really difficult. So I guess in your own journey, how have you come back to finding a safe place in prayer?
Yeah.
And forming a God that you can trust and that looks like you, that feels like you, that accepts you.
Yeah.
And just finding peace in that space of prayer.
Thank you, Isabella. Wonderful question, and you're very welcome here. And what you're saying is really the heart of our work together, is this really decolonizing ourselves from that white male God, that white male straight God, that really, you came, hey. that really is a barrier, is a block for us to feel like that's our God. You know, that's the God that really does have the preferential option for those who are oppressed. And so I think you'll find if you come back, Isabella, that is what we're exploring together. Really, how do we, and there is kind of an emerging, Tammy and I were just talking about this, there's an emergent theology that's taken hold here around who is God? Who is the God we can trust? The God of our ancestors. Can we pick apart some of the ways that Jesus got kidnapped, you know, taken away from us? The black Jesus, not the white Jesus. The white Jesus is a mascot, really, for empire. And how do we get back to a Jesus who really is about our liberation, that we can trust and that understands what it's like to walk in our shoes? That's the gift of Jesus, right? This accompaniment. But we have to, you know, kind of unburden, and we have to find him. We have to find him again. Yeah. So I hope you'll come back, because I feel like your question is the very heart of what we're doing. Can I get an amen? Is that what we're doing? We are doing it, yes. Thank you. Helpful question. Thank you so much.
So Isabel and then Libby Kyle's online.
Okay, yeah, I saw a couple of Libby's comments. Isabel?
I want to start with just like pausing for a minute, because I'm going to say some real tough stuff. I don't even really know if there's a question in what I have to say, other than my feelings on how do we talk about white supremacy culture with people who are not into talking about that and who shut down. And I may be biased. I am. I'm a healthcare worker, so this is where that's coming from. That's my lens. I have found that in this country, we are much more happy to talk about physical problems and disease than emotional and mental challenges. I have found that our health is steeped in white supremacy culture. I have found that in school, I did some research on pharmacogenomics, which is just a big word for saying, how do your genes affect the way drugs affect you? And I essentially had an argument with a white man during my presentation regarding people in black and brown bodies having genes that make them more susceptible to disease. Certain diseases like diabetes and hypertension. And that is what the data says. But what we don't talk about is that the majority of food in this country is toxic. And that white-bodied people, as a general rule, have access to less toxic food. And if you were to subdivide the white population into those with resources and those with less resources, you would see a lot more aligning of these so-called black and brown genes with the low-resourced white genes.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about that because that doesn't help keep us sick. It doesn't help keep us divided. We are in a country who is supposedly at the forefront of medical research, and yet all of our drugs address chronic issues because we build chronic issues, because it's profitable. And that is a continuation of the legacy of dividing the working class by saying black people have these genes.
Yeah.
they can't be healthy. And when we look at the reality, and this is deeply disgusting to say, and we talk about it in our land acknowledgement, is the...
It's all right, Isabel. We got you.
The history of chattel slavery in this country, and the consequence of that being that Black people were selectively bred.
Yep.
But the truth of that is, if that's what happened, then don't they have stronger genes? Don't they?
So you do have a question.
How have we made it to look like the opposite?
Yeah. Thank you, Isabel. Isabel, I'm so glad that you shared this with us, because the layer that you're inviting us into, let's all take a deep breath, is the reality of generational trauma, of epigenetics.
Let me piggyback on that.
Okay. Of the way that we carry generations of the systemic and structural trauma in our bodies. And then it's all exacerbated by the way systems were built to work for certain kinds of white people, right? But not for everybody. They weren't built to work for everybody. And so it gets harder and harder because of the way that we have a weird relationship with science in this country. We really do. We have there's an ambivalence, but then there's also well, science says. So when slavery started, when the transatlantic slave trade started in 1619 in this country, the science around eugenics and things like that didn't exist. Slavery was an economic decision. It was something that happened, and there were all kinds of different people that might have been enslaved. But Africa became kind of ground zero, right? Then the science was made up to support it. To say, oh yeah, these folks we have enslaved, well, they're inferior, and they this and they that. That science came after slavery began. Same with a lot of Western philosophy that is based on the superiority of Enlightenment thinking and things like that. That went hand in hand with, and therefore we're better than everybody else. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The first thing that came was the dollar that could be made if labor is free. If labor's free, somebody's making more money. And then you build the systems and the science and the culture to support this way that wealth can be accumulated. MC, and then I think you said something was online. That was
I've got those
Libby.
on the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get... Yeah, Libby said not everything is trauma, and what was the other?
Some things are hurts that remind us.
Some things are hurts that remind us, yes. So that's true, not everything is trauma. I would want to hear more from Libby about what's at stake for her in that statement. Remember, we go back to the definition. Trauma is too much, too fast, and there's more to it than that.
And not enough for too long.
And it can be for too long, left unacknowledged, left unaddressed. Trauma physiologically overrides some of our systems. It brings up certain responses of our nervous system, and it doesn't incorporate itself into our system of memory or even processing memory the same way. So trauma, it immediately kind of takes up home place in our bodies, in our cells, in our muscles, in our sensations. You know, a certain smell might bring up something for you, a certain landscape. Because trauma is too much too fast, it's not able to be incorporated in our filing system, in our memories the same way. So we know trauma, and many times not in the moment, but by its effects. We know trauma by the way it acts in our bodies, in our relationships, in our responses, in our muscle twitches, and in many times in our unconscious, in our subconscious. Trauma often elides, it avoids our consciousness. So it can show up in our dreams. It can show up in when we write and stuff just starts coming out and we think, where'd that come from? Right? MC, you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback and talk about epigenetics, right? So another mental health care lens. Hey, Steffi and Dan, see, they know what I'm talking about. So when you were talking about how medications, right, and genes, right, how that medication is affecting genes for Black and brown folks, and I'm thinking about how trauma itself affects genes in Black and brown folks, right?
Yeah.
And that epigenetics is how that trauma is passed on intergenerationally from generation to generation to generation, right? And because of chattel slavery and everything that came with that still lives in our bodies, and because we're still not free of that, it's still happening, right? So it's just re-triggering those genes that we continue to pass on. And it's something else I wanted to say about that. Oh, when we talk about diabetes and heart disease and high blood pressure, those things are commonly taught to Black and brown bodies by physicians that it's our food, which, yes, I agree with, and lack of exercise. Whatever. But what is the culprit really is trauma and how that lives in our bodies. It's exacerbated by food, this is what I read, right? Mm-hmm. By food and exercise, okay?
And the culture.
And culture,
And the culture.
Because of epigenetics, and because that trauma continues to be passed on and we keep reliving it and re-triggered, it continues to show up in us. Not because our genes are necessarily different, but exposed, right, to this type of trauma that's never ending, it seems.
Yeah.
So trauma also lives in our implicit, explicit memory, right? So in our brains and our bodies.
Yes.
And sometimes your body doesn't get the message that the trauma is over. So saying that for Black and brown bodies, why is it worse? Because the trauma is never freaking over.
Yeah.
Right? And for those folks that also have experienced trauma no matter what color you are, sure. Mm-hmm. But as we're talking about explicitly Black and brown bodies, that trauma is every day, all day long sometimes, depending on your community, your environment, your family. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And that kind of gets at Libby just put up in the chat that it's become a buzzword. So again, I wish Libby was here so we could explore this together a little bit. Maybe you can say more in the chat, Libby. But so yes, trauma is a buzzword that gets used a lot, but I guess I'd be curious about why that's a problem, unless somehow it feels like that somehow is an erasure of some forms of trauma. So as I said in truth-telling, about 70% of people can name some really prominent big thing that happened in their life that was trauma, that affected them. That's only people that report it. So there is a pervasiveness to trauma, and trauma impacts people different ways. Somebody might have the same thing happen to them, and it won't affect them the same way because they have different resources. They have different access to support. They had different people in their life that acknowledged what happened or protected them from it happening again. It's all this web of connection. And so we don't have to have a trauma Olympics, right? We don't. Because trauma is a part of being human. What's important is how do we respond to it? How do we build societies and cultures and spaces and communities that are informed enough about trauma to respond and to be a support when it happens, because it's gonna happen. And I also want to remind everybody that we're currently living in a country in which our federal government has said we cannot use trauma in any proposal for any federal funds. If you have trauma in your, just like if you have diversity, equity, inclusion, trauma is one of the words that you can't have in your proposals. So yes, we might be overusing it, but honey, I'd rather over than under, because we're now under attack where they're trying to erase this conversation so that we can learn together about it, because we're still learning. Remember what I said back in the 80s and 90s, this was sort of a new emerging field. And we have learned so much more. There's so much more now that we know. And we've got to keep learning. We've got to keep practicing. We've got to keep seeing what happens when we actually do have supportive communities. Then what happens? Let's try that petri dish, like what happens when we actually do. That's what we're trying to do at Grace Covenant. That's what our campus vision is. That's what our rent support is. That's what our worship is. How do we build this ecosystem of support that tells the truth about the toll that it takes to live in this country, especially for Black and brown people and other non-conforming bodies and indigenous people? So we've had a great conversation. Yes, Mary, you'll be the last question. Do you have a question? Okay. Oh, we had another question? Is it a question? No.
There's something on the chat if you want.
Okay, he's got a question. And is there a chat on the question? Okay, question in the chat, and then we'll get you.
Where was God for you in the midst of your trauma?
Who asked that?
D. Cooper.
Oh, thanks, Dee. So that's why Psalm 16 brought this conversation up for me. Because where God was for me was in my body. There was a part of me that even when I felt so alone, I didn't feel alone. And even when I didn't feel safe, I felt like somebody understood. And even when I didn't have anybody mirroring back to me in the human family, like, I see you, Marcia, I had God. Most specifically, I had Jesus. Jesus has really been the companion who understands for me since I was a little girl. And that's why I believe he did save me from myself, from my own self-destruction, because he was the piece, the golden thread of somebody who did understand, and somebody who saw what happened and witnessed it and knew what I was going through. Yeah.
You answered my question.
Oh, really? Oh, thank you. All right, see, this is a good day to have ice cream, isn't it? So let's all take a good breath together, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Another one in through your nose, out through your mouth. On this next one, our out breath, let's let it be a big sigh, in through your nose. Let it out. Let's do that 2 more times, in through your nose. Really let it out. One more time. So Grace Covenant, before we get started on our last song, I just want you to know that I see you, that I love you, that you are a gift in my life and in the world, and that we really are in this together. And I'm in it to the end. I hope you are too. Let's see where this takes us. And let's remember that we're not alone, even when we feel so alone. That same God that the psalmist wrote about, that brought this joy, that's ours too. And that's part of our resistance. That's part of the medicine that we bring. So thanks for the hard conversation, and let's stand and sing.